The radio crackled softly through the speakers as the city lights slid across the windshield. Somewhere between the slow bass line and that unmistakable voice, an entire era came back to life. Not just the music, the feeling, the summer nights, the lowriders, the silence after midnight in neighborhoods that raised legends and buried them too early. There were voices in hip-hop that made people dance. Others made people angry, but his voice felt different. Smooth, heavy, almost spiritual, like someone singing from the middle of a street corner prayer. Long before streaming numbers and viral hooks, there was a man who became the soul of West Coast hip-hop without ever needing to stand in the spotlight. They called him the King of Hooks, the voice behind classics that still echo through old car speakers and late-night memories across America. But behind the platinum records, the G-Funk success, and the fame surrounding Death Row Records, another story was unfolding quietly. A story filled with violence, pressure, addiction, betrayal, and a body slowly giving up while the world kept asking for one more song. How did one of the smoothest voices in hip-hop history end up fighting for his life before the age of 42? And why does the pain behind Nate Dogg's story still feel so close to home today? Before the gold records, before the smoke-filled studios and flashing police lights, there was a small church in Mississippi where a little boy first learned how to hold a note longer than his pain. Nate Dogg was born Nathaniel Dwayne Hale on August 19, 1969, in Clarksdale, Mississippi, the kind of place where music traveled through walls, through heat, through Sunday mornings heavy with gospel harmonies and worn wooden pews. His father was a pastor. His mother directed the church choir. Music was not entertainment inside that house. It was survival. It was discipline. It was faith. At just 6 years old, Nate was already singing alongside his siblings in a family gospel group. While other children chased bicycles down dusty roads, he was learning tone, rhythm, and harmony inside church halls filled with clapping hands and tired souls looking for hope. Those early years shaped everything about him. Even decades later, underneath the G-Funk sound and gangster image, there was always something spiritual hiding inside Nate Dogg's voice. Something old. Something deeply Southern. But childhood did not stay peaceful for long. When Nate was around 14 years old, his parents divorced. His mother packed up and moved the family west to Long Beach, California. The scenery changed completely. Palm trees replaced country roads. The churches sounded different. The streets sounded louder. And that move changed hip-hop history forever. At Long Beach Polytechnic High School, Nate met two teenagers who would become part of his life forever. Snoop Dogg and Warren G. They were kids then, playing basketball, chasing girls, hanging around parking lots after school, going to church together sometimes, listening to Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, and old soul records while California street culture wrapped around them day by day. Snoop was already obsessed with rapping. Warren G. was learning beats and production. Nate was different. He carried melody naturally. His voice came from gospel roots, not battle rap corners. Together, they formed something special before they even understood what it was. The streets around them were changing fast during the late 1980s. Gang culture was growing. Drugs were everywhere. Police helicopters became part of the nighttime soundtrack in many neighborhoods across Los Angeles County. By 17, Nate dropped out of high school and joined the Marines. For a moment, it looked like he might escape the streets completely. Structure, uniforms, discipline, maybe even a future far away from Long Beach. But peace never stayed long around him. After serving for roughly 3 years, Nate was discharged from the military. Stories surrounding his exit followed him for years, including an explosive personal incident involving betrayal, anger, and violence back home. Whether fully true or partly exaggerated over time, one thing became clear. Nate carried emotional weight that never really settled. When he returned to California, life became unstable quickly. No steady work, no direction. Eventually, even his mother put him out of the house. Like many young men from struggling neighborhoods at that time, survival came before dreams. Hustling became normal. Trouble followed close behind. At one point, Nate faced a robbery charge connected to a check-cashing location. But somewhere inside that chaos, music still remained alive. Snoop Dogg and Warren G were struggling too. All three young men had been pushed around by life, but together they built something that gave them purpose. They formed a group called 213, named after the Long Beach area code that shaped them. The setup was simple. Snoop rapped. Warren G handled the DJ side. Nate Dogg sang. But what came out of those homemade demo tapes did not sound simple at all. Their recordings started spreading quietly across Los Angeles. Copies moved through neighborhoods, parties, car stereos, swap meets, and small record stores. The sound felt different from anything else on the streets at that time. Smooth melodies floating over hard reality. Soul music riding alongside gangster stories. Without realizing it yet, Nate Dogg and 213 were helping create the sound that would soon define an entire generation of West Coast hip-hop. Some careers begin with opportunity. Others begin with timing. Nate Dogg's rise happened in the middle of a cultural earthquake. By the early 1990s, Los Angeles was changing the sound of hip-hop forever. The streets were tense. The music was louder. And somewhere inside small studios packed with cigarette smoke, old synthesizers, and dangerous energy, a new sound was being born. Dr. Dre heard the demos coming from 213 and immediately understood there was something special there. The smoothness, the melody, the balance between soul and street reality. It was different from the aggressive rap dominating the East Coast at the time. Soon, Nate Dogg found himself inside sessions for what would become one of the most important albums in hip-hop history. The Chronic. That album changed everything. Death Row Records exploded almost overnight. Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Suge Knight, the DOC, RBX, Lady of Rage, and others helped create a movement that felt bigger than music. It was West Coast hip-hop at full power. And right in the middle of it was Nate Dogg. Not screaming, not forcing attention, just floating through tracks with a voice that sounded calm enough to lower your heartbeat. When listeners heard songs like Little Ghetto Boy and D's Nuts, they began recognizing something unique. Nate Dogg was not simply singing hooks. He was creating atmosphere. He made records feel cinematic before people even used that word in hip-hop conversations. Then came Doggy Style. At the time, Snoop Dogg was becoming a superstar while fighting a murder case in real life. The pressure around Death Row Records kept growing, but the music coming out of those studios felt unstoppable. One of the songs that captured that era perfectly was Ain't No Fun. Nate Dogg's voice moved through that record like smoke through a dark room. Smooth, effortless, dangerous, funny, honest. The kind of performance that could only come from someone who truly lived around the culture he was singing about. That became the secret behind Nate Dogg's greatness. People believed him. He did not sound like a polished R&B singer pretending to understand street life. He sounded like someone standing right there beside the chaos. A man who could sing about heartbreak one minute and violence the next without sounding fake in either world. Soon, everyone wanted a Nate Dogg hook. Then came Regulate. The moment that changed everything forever. Warren G built the production around storytelling and slow G-funk rhythm. But Nate Dogg's opening lines transformed the song into history. The chemistry between them felt natural, almost effortless, like two old friends talking through music while driving through Long Beach at night. Regulate reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the defining songs of the golden age of hip-hop. Across America, car windows rolled down while Nate Dogg's voice echoed through city streets, gas stations, parking lots, and summer cookouts. For many fans, that song did not just represent West Coast hip-hop. It represented freedom. Around that time, even industry legends started speaking openly about Nate Dogg's importance. Ice Cube famously said that if you wanted a hit record, you needed a Nate Dogg hook. Charlie Wilson praised the soulfulness he brought into rap music. Radio personalities across Los Angeles described him as the emotional backbone of G-Funk. And they were right. Nate Dogg became the bridge between hard street rap and smooth R&B emotion. Before him, hooks often felt secondary. After him, hooks became essential. The money started arriving fast. Features, tours, studio sessions, endless phone calls from artists wanting that signature sound. Reports later claimed Nate Dogg charged over $150,000 for a hook during his peak years, with request after request coming every month. But fame inside Death Row Records came with a darker cost. Behind the platinum plaques and sold-out arenas, tension kept building. Violence followed people into the studios. Rivalries became personal. Guns appeared too often. Engineers feared getting caught in arguments that had nothing to do with music. Even Nate Dogg himself reportedly started wearing a bulletproof vest to recording sessions. The success was massive, but the danger surrounding it was growing even faster. Success inside the music industry can feel beautiful from far away. Up close, it often looks like exhaustion hiding behind expensive jewelry and studio lights that never turn off. By the mid-1990s, Death Row Records had become one of the most powerful labels in America. But inside those walls, the atmosphere was changing fast. Fights broke out regularly. Guns appeared during arguments. Tension followed artists into recording booths like a second shadow. The music was still legendary. The environment was becoming dangerous. When Suge Knight made his now infamous comments at the Source Awards in New York, the East Coast versus West Coast rivalry exploded into something much bigger than rap music. Suddenly, every interview, every concert, every appearance carried pressure behind it. Nate Dogg later admitted even he thought the moment felt reckless. That night, according to stories told years later, Nate and DJ Quick reportedly stood back-to-back inside the crowd, quietly watching for trouble. Nobody knew what could happen once emotions took over the room. That was the reality surrounding West Coast hip-hop during that era. Fear mixed with fame. And then came the violence that changed everything forever. On September 7, 1996, Tupac Shakur was shot in Las Vegas. Nate Dogg was reportedly only a few cars behind when the shooting happened. For a moment, confusion swallowed everything. Sirens, panic, rumors spreading faster than facts. People inside Death Row Records understood immediately that nothing would ever feel normal again. 6 days later, Tupac died. And something inside the entire West Coast music scene seemed to collapse with him. The energy at Death Row Records became darker after that. FBI investigations increased. Studios were raided. Artists started leaving one by one. Dr. Dre walked away. Others disappeared quietly before things became worse. Meanwhile, Nate Dogg still could not fully break free. Fans already viewed him as the king of hooks, but his own solo career kept getting delayed. Many believed Death Row Records failed to capitalize on his peak popularity when the world was demanding more from him. That frustration stayed with him. Eventually, Nate left the label and launched his own imprint under a new deal. In 1998, he finally released G-Funk Classics, Volume 1 and 2. By then, however, the sound that once dominated radio was slowly losing momentum. Hip-hop was changing. The shiny suit era had arrived. Southern rap was rising. Trends were shifting faster than artists could adapt. The album performed modestly, but nowhere near what many believed Nate Dogg deserved. Still, his voice remained everywhere. Dr. Dre called. Snoop Dogg called. Ludacris called. 50 Cent called. Fabulous. Mos Def Exhibit. Jadakiss. Eminem's Circle. Everyone wanted Nate Dogg somewhere on their records because he brought something machines could never manufacture. Authenticity. When his voice entered a song, people relaxed instantly. Felt human. But outside the studio, Nate's personal life was beginning to spiral. Arrests became common headlines. Assault allegations. Domestic disputes. Weapons charges. Courtrooms started replacing recording sessions. Friends later admitted that alcohol had become a serious problem in his life. Some described an alter ego that appeared when he drank heavily, a version of Nate they barely recognized. The partying never truly slowed down. Neither did the damage happening inside his body. In 2007, Nate Dogg and his girlfriend were involved in a horrific car accident. The vehicle reportedly flipped multiple times, leaving him badly injured with head trauma and internal bleeding. Most people would have stayed in the hospital. Nate checked himself out early to perform in Las Vegas. That decision said everything about the pressure artists often carry silently. The show had to continue, even while the body was breaking underneath the spotlight. Months later, he suffered his first major stroke. For a while, it looked like he might recover completely. Friends visited him in the hospital hoping the scare would force him to slow down. But according to people close to him, alcohol remained part of his life even after doctors warned him about the danger. Then came the second stroke in 2008. This one changed everything. The damage was devastating. Nate Dogg became partially paralyzed. He struggled to walk, struggled to speak. The man whose voice once defined an entire generation of G-Funk suddenly found himself trapped inside silence. For fans, it felt impossible to process. A voice that once sounded larger than life had been reduced to whispers inside hospital rooms. And perhaps the cruelest part of all was this. He was only in his 30s when his body started giving up on him. When Nate Dogg disappeared from music, people noticed immediately. Not because he chased attention, but because his voice had quietly become part of everyday life in America. For years, West Coast hip-hop moved with Nate Dogg somewhere in the background. His hooks played during backyard cookouts in California, through old speakers at gas stations in Texas, across late-night highways in Chicago, Atlanta, Detroit, and neighborhoods far beyond the West Coast itself. People did not just listen to Nate Dogg. They attached memories to him. For many Americans who grew up during the golden age of hip-hop, hearing songs like Regulate, Area Codes, or 21 Questions felt like opening old photo albums. His voice carried nostalgia without even trying. That is why his decline hit people so hard. Inside the music industry, artists openly described Nate Dogg as irreplaceable. Snoop Dogg repeatedly referred to him as one of the greatest musical forces to ever come from the West Coast. Ice Cube explained that hit records simply felt incomplete without a Nate Dogg hook. Charlie Wilson praised the emotional depth he brought into rap music. Even younger artists studied his formula. Long before melodic rap became mainstream, Nate Dogg had already shown the world how singing and street storytelling could exist together naturally. Many modern artists unknowingly borrowed pieces of the path he helped create. Internationally, fans often remembered Nate Dogg as part of the larger gangster rap movement connected to Death Row Records, Dr. Dre, Tupac, and the rise of G-Funk culture during the 1990s. Outside America, his image became tied to lowriders, palm trees, gold chains, and the cinematic mythology surrounding West Coast hip-hop. But inside the United States, especially among older listeners, the connection felt more personal than that. People remembered how honest his voice sounded. There was pain inside it, humor too, exhaustion, loyalty, survival. He sounded like somebody who understood what struggle actually felt like after the music stopped. When Nate Dogg passed away in 2011 from complications related to multiple strokes, tributes poured in across the hip-hop world. Fans mourned him not only as an artist, but as part of an era that was slowly disappearing. Still, even after his death, peace did not come easily. Disputes over his estate created painful headlines involving family members, medical debt, and legal battles over ownership and finances. It became another reminder of how fragile fame can become once the spotlight fades away. Yet despite all the complications surrounding his final years, one thing never changed: the respect people carried for his talent. To this day, younger generations continue discovering Nate Dogg through old records, documentaries, playlists, and samples passed down like family stories. And every time that deep melodic voice enters a song, it still feels instantly recognizable, like hearing an old friend calling from another lifetime. Some voices never really disappear. They just become part of the background of people's lives. Somewhere tonight, an old Nate Dogg record is probably playing through cracked car speakers under fading streetlights. Somebody is driving home after a long shift. Somebody is remembering high school. Somebody is thinking about friends who are no longer here. And without realizing it, they are carrying Nate Dogg with them. That is what real legacy looks like. Not just awards. Not just platinum records or chart positions. Real legacy lives inside emotion, inside memory, inside moments people never forget. Nate Dogg changed hip-hop forever because he understood something many artists still struggle to understand today. People do not only remember lyrics. They remember how music made them feel. His voice gave G-Funk its heartbeat. Before Nate Dogg, hooks were often treated like decoration. After Nate, hooks became emotional anchors. Suddenly, rap records needed melody, needed atmosphere, needed soul. Artists across generations started following a blueprint he quietly created years earlier. And yet, his story also became a warning. The fame, the pressure, the violence surrounding death row records, the non-stop partying, the alcohol, the emotional weight carried silently for years. None of it disappeared just because the records sold millions. Sometimes the people making the soundtrack for everybody else's lives are privately falling apart inside their own. That truth makes Nate Dogg's story painful for so many fans who grew up during the golden age of hip-hop. Because behind all the classic records was a man still trying to survive himself, still trying to find peace. Even during his final years, after the strokes and hospital stays, people close to him said he wanted to reconnect with gospel music again. The same music that first shaped him as a child in Mississippi churches decades earlier. In a strange way, life brought him full circle. Back to faith, back to reflection, back to the sound that existed before fame ever arrived. Today, younger artists still study his style. Older fans still defend his greatness passionately. And every time conversations begin about the greatest voices in West Coast hip-hop history, Nate Dogg's name rises naturally to the surface. Because there was only one Nate Dogg, only one king of hooks, only one voice that could make pain sound smooth without hiding the truth underneath it. Maybe that is why his music still survives while so many trends disappeared. Because honesty never really ages. If Nate Dogg's story brought back memories for you, share them below. What was the first song that introduced you to his voice? Do you believe G-Funk was the greatest era in hip-hop?